Imagine discovering a world where cities of gold shimmer beyond endless deserts, where emperors command armies of 1 million men, and where merchants trade in treasures so exotic they seem conjured from dreams. 7 centuries ago, when most Europeans believed the world ended at the horizon, one young man dared to venture into the unknown and returned with tales so extraordinary that many refused to believe them. Tonight, we journey alongside Marco Polo, the most famous traveler in human history, as he crosses continents that existed only in legend, encounters civilizations more advanced than anything in medieval Europe, and serves in the court of the most powerful ruler the world has ever known. This is his story, a tale of wonder, courage, and discovery that unfolded along the ancient Silk Road more than 700 years ago. In the year 1254, in the floating city of Venice, a child was born into a world where distant lands were spoken of in whispers, where spices from the east were worth more than gold, and where the edges of maps were marked with mysterious creatures and unknown territories. This child would grow to become the most famous traveler of his age, a man whose journey would take him across deserts and mountains, through kingdoms and empires, to places that existed only in legend for most Europeans of his time. Venice in the 13th century was already a gateway between East and West, its canals filled with ships carrying precious goods from distant shores. The air was thick with the scent of cinnamon and cloves, silk merchants called out their wares, and tales of far-off lands filled the taverns where sailors and traders gathered. It was in this atmosphere of commerce and curiosity that young Marco Polo would develop his hunger for adventure. Tonight, we will follow in his footsteps, traveling at the gentle pace of a caravan crossing endless steppes, moving with the rhythm of camels' bells and the whispered stories shared around countless campfires. Let the tensions of your day dissolve as we journey together through time, discovering wonders that captivated the medieval world and continue to fascinate us today. Our story truly begins not with Marco, but with his father Niccolo and uncle Marco Polo, experienced merchants who had already tasted the mysteries of the East. In 1260, these two brothers set sail from Venice on what they believed would be a routine trading expedition to Constantinople. They could not have imagined that their journey would lead them on an adventure that would change their family's destiny forever. Picture, if you will, the bustling harbor of Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul, where Europe meets Asia in a swirl of cultures, languages, and trade. The brothers had planned to sell their goods and return home, but fate had other plans. Political upheaval blocked their usual route back to Venice, forcing them to venture further east, deeper into the unknown territories beyond the Black Sea. As they traveled eastward, following ancient trade routes that connected distant civilizations, Niccolo and Marco found themselves in the court of Embark Khan, ruler of the western portion of the Mongol Empire. The Khan received them with curiosity and hospitality, for Europeans were rare visitors in these lands. The brothers spent a year in his service, learning the customs of the Mongol people and absorbing stories of the vast empire that stretched from Eastern Europe to the Pacific Ocean. But their greatest adventure was yet to come. Continuing their journey eastward, they eventually arrived at the summer palace of the great Khan himself, Kublai Khan, grandson of the legendary Genghis Khan and ruler of the largest empire the world had ever known. Imagine their wonder as they approached Xanadu, the Khan's summer residence, with its marble palaces and golden pavilions, its gardens filled with exotic animals and fountains that sparkled in the Asian sun. Kublai Khan was fascinated by these strange visitors from the distant West. He had heard tales of Europe and Christianity, but had never met Europeans face to face. The Khan's curiosity was insatiable. He questioned the Polo brothers about their homeland, their customs, their religion, and their knowledge of the world beyond his empire. For months, they remained as honored guests in his court, sharing stories of Venice and the Mediterranean world. When the time came for their departure in 1269, Kublai Khan entrusted them with a momentous mission. He gave them a golden tablet, a pesa, which served as a passport guaranteeing safe passage throughout his empire. More importantly, he asked them to return with learned men who could teach him about Christianity and Western knowledge. He also requested holy oil from the lamp that burned at Christ's sepulchre in Jerusalem, a request that revealed his genuine spiritual curiosity. The journey home took the brothers 3 years, a testament to the vast distances they had covered and the challenges of medieval travel. When they finally arrived in Venice in 1269, after 9 years of absence, they found a world that had almost forgotten them. Niccolò discovered that his wife had died during his absence, leaving behind a son he had never met, 17-year-old Marco Polo. As the family reunited in their Venetian palace, imagine young Marco listening with wide eyes to his father's and uncle's tales of distant lands, of emperors who ruled over millions, of cities larger than any in Europe, and of wonders beyond imagination. The golden tablet of Kublai Khan lay before them, a tangible proof of their incredible journey. For Marco, these stories ignited a flame of curiosity that would shape the rest of his life. The call to return to the East came sooner than expected. In 1271, after only 2 years in Venice, the Polo brothers prepared for their second journey to the court of Kublai Khan. This time, however, they would not travel alone. Despite his youth, Marco was only 17, he would join them on what would become one of the most famous journeys in human history. As they prepared for departure, gathering supplies, maps, and trade goods, Marco must have felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation. He was leaving behind everything familiar, the canals of Venice, the warmth of home, the security of known places, for a journey into the vast unknown. Yet the lure of adventure, the promise of wonders beyond imagination, and the trust his family placed in him propelled him forward. On a crisp morning in 1271, 3 figures could be seen boarding a ship in Venice's harbor. Niccolò, now a veteran of Eastern travel, Maffeo, his experienced brother, and young Marco, whose bright eyes reflected both the excitement and uncertainty of the great adventure that lay ahead. As Venice faded into the morning mist behind them, they sailed toward a destiny that would make the name Marco Polo legendary for centuries to come. The Silk Road was not a single road, but rather a network of ancient trade routes that connected east and west like arteries carrying the lifeblood of commerce and culture. As our 3 Venetian travelers began their epic journey, they joined this river of humanity that flowed across continents, carrying not just silk and spices, but ideas, religions, and dreams. Their first destination was Acre, in the Holy Land, where they fulfilled Kublai Khan's request for holy oil from the lamp at Christ's sepulchre. The newly elected Pope Gregory X, understanding the significance of establishing relations with the Mongol Empire, provided them with letters for the Khan and assigned 2 Dominican friars to accompany them as teachers and ambassadors of the Christian faith. From Acre, the small expedition traveled north through Armenia, a land of ancient churches carved into mountain cliffs and monasteries that seemed to touch the clouds. Here, young Marco encountered his first taste of the cultural diversity that would characterize his entire journey. Armenian merchants shared their campfires, speaking in musical languages he didn't understand, yet communicating through the universal languages of trade and human kindness. However, their journey nearly ended before it truly began. As they approached the borders of the Mongol territories, conflicts between local rulers made travel dangerous. The two Dominican friars, frightened by reports of warfare ahead, decided to return to the safety of Acre, leaving the three Polos to continue alone. This decision, disappointing as it was, freed the small party to travel more quickly and with greater flexibility. As winter approached, they found themselves in the ancient city of Trebizond on the Black Sea, waiting for favorable weather to continue their journey. Marco spent these months learning the arts of Eastern travel, how to read the sky for weather signs, how to care for camels and horses, how to sleep under the stars, and how to find water in seemingly barren landscapes. These skills would serve him well in the years to come. Spring brought them to Erzurum, in what is now eastern Turkey, and then to the great trading city of Tabriz in Persia. Here, Marco encountered his first truly eastern city, with its covered bazaars, minarets reaching toward heaven, and the intoxicating blend of aromas, cardamom, saffron, rose water, and leather. Persian merchants, recognizable by their elegant robes and careful manner of speech, bargained over goods from across the known world. The journey through Persia was both beautiful and challenging. They traveled through landscapes that seemed painted by the gods, vast deserts that shimmered like golden seas under the sun, oases that appeared like green jewels in the wilderness, and mountain ranges that scraped the belly of heaven itself. At night, when the desert air turned cold and the stars appeared in countless multitudes unknown to European skies, Marco would lie in his bedroll and wonder at the vastness of the world he was discovering. In the ancient city of Balkh, once a great center of learning and culture, they joined a caravan preparing to cross the most challenging portion of their journey, the high passes of the Hindu Kush mountains and the trackless wastes of the Gobi Desert. Caravans were the lifelines of Silk Road trade, offering protection through numbers and the wisdom of experienced guides who knew every water source, every safe camping spot, every hazard along the thousands of miles of desert routes. The caravan that adopted the three Venetians was a marvel of medieval logistics. Hundreds of camels, each capable of carrying several hundred pounds of goods, stretched in long lines across the landscape. There were merchants from dozens of nations, Turks, Persians, Arabs, Indians, and Chinese, each group recognizable by their clothing, their customs, and their languages. At night, the caravan formed a temporary city, with cooking fires, sleeping areas, and guards posted to watch for bandits or wild animals. As they climbed into the Pamirs, the roof of the world, the air grew thin and the landscape more austere. Here, Marco first encountered yaks, those sturdy high-altitude cattle whose warm breath created clouds in the frigid air. The local people, hardy mountain dwellers adapted to life at altitudes that left the Venetians gasping, shared their knowledge of survival in this harsh but magnificent environment. The descent from the mountains brought them to the edge of the Taklamakan Desert, one of the most forbidding environments on Earth. Here, the caravan's pace slowed to accommodate the peculiar challenges of desert travel. They moved during the cooler hours of dawn and dusk, resting during the heat of midday in whatever shade could be found or created. Water became more precious than gold, rationed carefully and guarded constantly. Yet even in this seemingly lifeless landscape, Marco found wonders to marvel at. The desert's silence was profound, broken only by the soft bells of the caravan and the whispered conversations of fellow travelers. At sunset, the dunes turned colors that had no names, purples and golds and roses that existed nowhere else on earth. At night, the stars seemed close enough to pluck from the sky, and the Milky Way stretched across the heavens like a river of light. The oasis towns scattered across the desert were miracles of human ingenuity and persistence. Places like Kashgar and Yarkand were green islands of life in the sea of sand, their markets filled with goods from across Asia. Here, Chinese silk merchants met traders carrying furs from Siberia, while Indian spice dealers bargained with men who had traveled from the distant shores of the Black Sea. After more than 3 years of travel, covering thousands of miles through some of the most challenging terrain on earth, the three dusty, travel-worn Venetians finally approached the borders of Cathay, as China was known in the West. They had survived sandstorms and mountain passes, hostile tribes and treacherous terrain, disease and exhaustion. Now, as they prepared to enter the realm of the Great Khan, they could not have imagined the wonders that awaited them in the empire that had captured their dreams and drawn them across the world. The approach to Khanbaliq, Kublai Khan's winter capital, was like entering a dream made manifest. As the three travel-weary Venetians crested the final hill overlooking the great city, they beheld a sight that no European had ever witnessed, a metropolis that housed over 1 million souls, its walls stretching beyond the horizon, its palaces and temples gleaming in the morning sun like jewels scattered across silk cloth. Khanbaliq, which would later become Beijing, was a marvel of urban planning and architectural ambition. The city was laid out in perfect squares, its wide boulevards designed to accommodate the massive processions and ceremonies that marked the rhythm of imperial life. Gardens and parks provided green spaces where citizens could escape the bustle of commerce, while canals brought fresh water from distant mountains to supply the needs of this vast population. When news reached Kublai Khan that the Venetian merchants had returned, and this time with young Marco in their company, he commanded their immediate presence at court. The reunion between the Khan and the elder Polos was warm and genuine. In their previous visit, they had proven themselves to be not only reliable but also fascinating companions, capable of sharing knowledge about the Western world that intrigued the emperor greatly. But it was young Marco who truly captured the Khan's attention. At 21, Marco possessed a rare combination of curiosity, intelligence, and adaptability that made him an ideal student of Eastern ways. The Khan, now in his 60s and one of the most powerful men who had ever lived, found in this young Venetian a worthy pupil and, eventually, a trusted advisor. The palace complex where Kublai Khan held court was a wonder that challenged everything Marco thought he knew about luxury and power. The main audience hall could accommodate thousands of visitors, its ceiling supported by columns carved from single pieces of precious wood and painted in gold and azure. The walls were decorated with scenes of Mongol conquests and Chinese landscapes, creating a visual narrative of the empire's vast extent and cultural diversity. During his first formal audience, Marco was struck by the Khan's presence. Despite his age, Kublai Khan possessed an energy and intelligence that commanded immediate respect. He was not the savage barbarian that some Western texts described the Mongols to be, but rather a sophisticated ruler who had absorbed the best elements of Chinese civilization while maintaining the military prowess and administrative efficiency of his Mongol heritage. The Khan's curiosity about the Western world was insatiable, and he spent hours questioning Marco about European customs, technology, and politics. In return, he shared his own knowledge of the vast empire he ruled, which stretched from Korea in the east to the borders of Poland in the west, from the frozen forests of Siberia in the north to the tropical islands of Southeast Asia in the south. What fascinated Marco most was the Khan's approach to governance. Rather than ruling through fear alone, as many Western rulers did, Kublai Khan had created a sophisticated bureaucratic system that incorporated the best administrative traditions of China while utilizing the military efficiency of Mongol organization. Officials were selected based on merit through elaborate examinations, and the empire was bound together by an incredibly efficient postal system that could carry messages across thousands of miles in a matter of weeks. The diversity of the Khan's court was breathtaking. On any given day, Marco might encounter ambassadors from Java, merchants from India, scholars from Persia, generals from Mongolia, and administrators from every corner of the Chinese provinces. Each group maintained its own customs and dress, creating a cosmopolitan atmosphere unlike anything that existed in medieval Europe. As months passed, Marco's facility with languages improved dramatically. He learned to speak Mongolian and several Chinese dialects, skills that proved invaluable when the Khan began assigning him important missions throughout the empire. The Khan had recognized in Marco not just an intelligent young man, but someone whose foreign perspective could provide valuable insights into the administration of his vast territories. Marco's first major assignment took him to the province of Yunnan, in what is now southwestern China. This journey alone would have been considered an epic adventure by European standards, covering thousands of miles through landscapes that ranged from rice paddies to tropical forests to mountain passes shrouded in perpetual mist. Along the way, he observed and recorded details about local customs, economic conditions, and administrative challenges that proved invaluable to the Khan upon his return. The imperial lifestyle that Marco witnessed was beyond anything imaginable in 13th-century Europe. The Khan's summer palace at Xanadu, famously described in Coleridge's poem as Xanadu, was surrounded by a park that contained deer, exotic birds, and even a herd of white horses that only the Khan was permitted to ride. The palace itself was built partially of bamboo, designed to be dismantled and moved if necessary, reflecting the Mongol heritage of nomadic mobility even in the context of settled luxury. The Khan's interest in different religions and philosophies was particularly remarkable to Marco. While maintaining his own shamanistic and Mongol traditions, Kublai Khan actively supported Buddhist monasteries, Confucian schools, Islamic scholars, and Nestorian Christian communities. This religious tolerance was not merely political calculation but seemed to reflect a genuine intellectual curiosity about different approaches to understanding the world and humanity's place in it. Winter evenings in the palace were filled with entertainments that showcased the cultural richness of the empire. Musicians from Tibet might perform alongside dancers from Southeast Asia, while storytellers from Persia shared tales with Chinese poets. These gatherings were not merely entertainment but served as a form of cultural exchange that helped bind the diverse empire together through shared appreciation of beauty and artistry. As the seasons turned and Marco's responsibilities at court increased, he found himself becoming not just an observer of this remarkable civilization, but a participant in its daily workings. The Khan valued his perspectives precisely because they came from outside the established patterns of Chinese and Mongol thought. In discussions about trade policy, military strategy, or administrative reform, Marco's European background allowed him to suggest approaches that might not have occurred to lifelong residents of the empire. The trust that developed between the young Venetian and the aging emperor was based on mutual respect and genuine affection. The Khan saw in Marco a bridge between his empire and the wider world, while Marco found in the Khan not just a powerful ruler but a teacher who opened his mind to ways of thinking about governance, culture, and human nature that were far more sophisticated than anything he had encountered in medieval Europe. As Marco Polo's years in the service of Kublai Khan multiplied, his travels throughout the empire revealed wonders that challenged every assumption he had held about the world. Each province of Cathay seemed to contain marvels that exceeded the last, creating a tapestry of human achievement and natural beauty that would have seemed fantastical to his contemporaries in Venice. In the great city of Hangzhou, which Marco knew as Qinsai, he encountered urban sophistication that surpassed even Venice's renowned splendor. With a population exceeding 1 million inhabitants, Hangzhou was quite possibly the largest city in the world at that time. Its canals, even more numerous than those of Venice, were filled with boats carrying everything from silk and porcelain to fresh fish and vegetables from the surrounding countryside. The markets of Hangzhou were a symphony of commerce and culture. Marco wandered through districts devoted entirely to different crafts, entire streets where only silk weavers worked, their looms creating patterns of such intricacy that they seemed to capture light itself in their threads. Other quarters housed porcelain makers whose delicate creations were so fine they seemed translucent, allowing light to pass through their walls in a soft, ethereal glow. What struck Marco most profoundly was the level of specialization and organization in Chinese society. Guilds regulated every aspect of craft production, ensuring quality while also providing social support for their members. Workers who became ill or injured were cared for by their guild brothers, creating a social safety net that was far more comprehensive than anything existing in medieval Europe. The Chinese approach to technology was equally impressive. Marco observed the use of paper money, an innovation that allowed merchants to conduct large transactions without the burden of carrying heavy coins across vast distances. This monetary system was backed by the Khan's authority and accepted throughout the empire, creating a level of economic integration that wouldn't be achieved in Europe for centuries. In the realm of transportation, Marco marveled at the Grand Canal, an engineering project that connected the agricultural south with the political north through a series of waterways that stretched for over 1,000 miles. Watching the constant stream of barges carrying rice, silk, and other goods along this liquid highway, Marco began to understand how the Khan could effectively administer such a vast territory. The Chinese mastery of agriculture was another source of wonder. In the rice-growing regions of the south, Marco observed farming techniques that produced far higher yields than European methods. The careful management of water through elaborate irrigation systems, the use of human waste as fertilizer to maintain soil fertility, and the development of multiple cropping seasons created an agricultural surplus that supported large urban populations. During his travels through the province of Fujian, Marco encountered the Chinese maritime tradition that had already begun to explore the oceans beyond Asia. Chinese ships, built with watertight compartments and equipped with magnetic compasses, were far more advanced than European vessels. These junks, as they were called, could carry hundreds of tons of cargo and dozens of passengers on voyages that lasted many months. The city of Guangzhou, known to Marco as Zaidan, served as one of the empire's great ports, where ships from across the known world brought goods and ideas. Here, Marco met Arab merchants who had sailed across the Indian Ocean, Southeast Asian traders carrying spices from islands whose names he could barely pronounce, and Indian dealers in precious stones and fine textiles. The cosmopolitan nature of these Chinese ports rivaled anything he had known in Venice. Chinese medicine provided another source of fascination. Marco observed physicians who could diagnose illness by feeling the pulse, who used tiny needles inserted into specific points on the body to treat pain and disease, and who prescribed remedies made from combinations of plants that grew in the empire's diverse climates. The Chinese approach to medicine seemed to view the body as a complete system rather than focusing on individual symptoms, an approach that often proved more effective than European methods. The role of women in Chinese society was notably different from what Marco had known in Europe. While still subject to many restrictions, Chinese women participated more actively in commerce and could own property. In some regions, particularly among the merchant classes, Marco encountered women who managed substantial businesses and wielded considerable influence in their communities. Chinese artistic achievements were equally impressive. Marco witnessed the creation of landscape paintings that captured not just the appearance of natural scenes but seemed to convey their spiritual essence. Chinese artists could suggest vast mountain ranges with just a few brush strokes, create the impression of flowing water with elegant curves, and capture the play of mist and cloud with techniques that had no European equivalent. The Chinese calendar and astronomical observations revealed a sophisticated understanding of natural cycles. Marco learned about the precise calculation of lunar months, the prediction of eclipses, and the creation of calendars that helped farmers optimize their planting and harvesting. Chinese astronomers had been keeping detailed records of celestial events for centuries, creating a body of knowledge that far exceeded European understanding of the heavens. In the field of printing, Marco observed the mass production of books using wooden blocks carved with text and illustrations. This technology allowed for the widespread distribution of knowledge and literature, creating a more literate population than existed anywhere in Europe. Books that would have been priceless manuscripts in Venice were commonly available in Chinese markets. The Chinese mastery of silk production remained one of their most closely guarded secrets, but Marco was able to observe portions of the process during his travels. The cultivation of silkworms, the careful harvesting of their cocoons, and the spinning of silk thread into fabric of incredible fineness and strength represented centuries of accumulated knowledge and skill. Perhaps most impressive of all was the Chinese understanding of hydraulic engineering. Marco witnessed the construction of elaborate systems of locks and dams that controlled river flow, prevented flooding, and enabled navigation of waterways throughout the empire. These projects required not just technical skill but also the ability to organize and coordinate the labor of thousands of workers over many years. As Marco traveled through these provinces of wonder, he began to understand that he was witnessing a civilization that had achieved a level of sophistication and organization that surpassed anything in his known world. The challenge would be to remember and record these marvels accurately, knowing that many of his eventual readers would find them almost impossible to believe. As Marco Polo's service to Kublai Khan continued, his journeys extended beyond the borders of Cathay proper into the tropical realms of Southeast Asia. These expeditions into the southern seas would reveal wonders that seemed drawn from the most fantastical tales told in Venetian taverns, yet were real kingdoms flourishing in the warm waters beyond the Chinese mainland. The Khan had entrusted Marco with diplomatic missions to various tributary kingdoms and trading partners throughout what Europeans would later call the East Indies. These journeys were undertaken not in the familiar caravans of the Silk Road, but aboard Chinese junks whose holds were filled with porcelain, silk, and other treasures of Cathay, to be traded for the spices, precious stones, and exotic products of the tropical islands. The first stage of these maritime adventures took Marco to the Kingdom of Kampa, located along the coast of what is now Vietnam. Here, he encountered his first truly tropical civilization, where the architecture was designed to capture cooling breezes and the abundant rainfall of the monsoon seasons. Cham palaces were built on stilts above rivers that served as both highways and sources of fresh water, while temples dedicated to Hindu deities rose from jungle clearings like stone flowers blooming in the green twilight. The king of Kampa received the Khan's embassy with elaborate ceremonies that showcased the wealth and sophistication of his realm. Marco observed court rituals that had evolved over centuries, blending Hindu traditions from India with local customs unique to Southeast Asia. Dancers moved with fluid grace that seemed to mirror the motion of tropical plants swaying in warm breezes, while musicians played instruments that created haunting melodies unlike anything heard in the courts of either Europe or China. From Kampa, Marco's journey continued southward to the island of Java, known then as one of the great spice-producing regions of the world. The approach to Java by sea was itself a wonder. The ship passed through archipelagos of countless small islands, each covered with vegetation so lush and green that it seemed like nature's own paradise. The water was so clear that fish could be seen swimming far below the surface, while flying fish leaped alongside the vessel as if escorting the visitors to their destination. Java's ports bustled with activity that rivaled even the great commercial centers of China. Here, merchants from across the known world came to obtain the precious spices that grew only in these tropical climates. Marco witnessed the trading of nutmeg, cloves, and cinnamon, substances so valuable in Europe that they were worth more than their weight in gold. The Javanese had developed sophisticated systems for cultivating and processing these spices, knowledge that was closely guarded and passed down through generations of specialized farmers. The rulers of Java possessed wealth that seemed almost magical to medieval eyes. Their palaces were decorated with gold leaf that caught the tropical sunlight and created an almost ethereal glow. Gardens filled with flowers that bloomed continuously in the eternal summer climate surrounded these royal residences, while peacocks and other exotic birds provided living decorations that no European palace could match. Marco's travels through the Javanese interior revealed agricultural techniques adapted to the tropical environment. Rice was grown in terraced paddies that climbed hillsides like green staircases, while coconut palms provided not just food but materials for construction, clothing, and countless daily necessities. The Javanese had learned to live in harmony with their lush environment, using its abundance wisely while maintaining the ecological balance that sustained their prosperity. The religious life of Java fascinated Marco, who encountered Buddhism and Hinduism blended with local spiritual traditions in ways that created unique forms of worship and artistic expression. Magnificent temples like Borobudur, though already ancient by Marco's time, demonstrated the architectural and spiritual achievements of Javanese civilization. These structures seemed to capture in stone the very essence of tropical paradise, with their intricate carvings of celestial beings and earthly abundance. Further south, Marco's journeys took him to the island of Sumatra, where he encountered the kingdom of Samudra, from which the island would eventually take its name. Here, he observed the cultivation and processing of pepper, another spice that commanded enormous prices in European markets. The pepper gardens of Sumatra were carefully tended groves where vines climbed tall trees, their clusters of berries harvested at precisely the right moment to ensure maximum flavor and preservation. The maritime skills of the Southeast Asian peoples were remarkable to observe. Their ships, while different in design from Chinese junks, were perfectly adapted to navigating the complex waterways of the island archipelagos. Local navigators could read the subtle signs of ocean currents, wind patterns, and seasonal weather changes with a precision that allowed them to sail safely between islands that European maps had not yet even imagined. In the courts of these island kingdoms, Marco encountered diplomatic protocols that reflected centuries of international trade and cultural exchange. Rulers maintained relationships not just with China, but with kingdoms in India, the Middle East, and North Africa. The cosmopolitan nature of these courts, where multiple languages were spoken and various religious and cultural traditions were represented, provided Marco with insights into the truly global nature of medieval commerce. The natural abundance of these tropical regions seemed almost supernatural to someone raised in the more austere climate of Europe. Fruit trees provided food year-round, while the seas teemed with fish and other marine life. The absence of winter meant that agricultural cycles were continuous, supporting larger populations with less labor than was required in northern climates. As Marco prepared to return from these southern journeys, his mind filled with memories of golden temples rising from jungle clearings, of harbors filled with ships from dozens of nations, of spice gardens that perfumed the very air with their precious fragrances. He knew that he had witnessed wonders that would be difficult to describe to those who had never left the familiar world of medieval Europe. The treasures he carried back to Kublai Khan's court were not just the material goods acquired through trade, but also the knowledge of these remarkable civilizations that had flourished in the warm seas beyond China's southern borders. These experiences would later form some of the most exotic and captivating passages in his eventual account of his travels, bringing to European readers their first detailed descriptions of the Spice Islands that had been sources of legend and wealth for centuries. After 17 years in the service of Kublai Khan, the time had come for the Polo family to contemplate their return to Venice. The decision was not an easy one. They had built lives of comfort and influence in the Khan's court, and the prospect of the long, dangerous journey home weighed heavily on their minds. Moreover, Kublai Khan, now in his 70s, was reluctant to lose the services of his trusted Venetian advisors, particularly Marco, whose unique perspective and diplomatic skills had proved invaluable. The opportunity for departure came in an unexpected form. The Khan of Persia, a relative of Kublai Khan, had requested a bride from the Mongol imperial family. A beautiful young princess named Kokachin was selected for this honor, but the overland route through Central Asia had become too dangerous due to ongoing conflicts between various Mongol factions. The princess would need to travel by sea, and experienced navigators were required to ensure her safe passage. Recognizing the Polos' maritime background and their knowledge of both Eastern and Western ways, Kublai Khan reluctantly agreed to let them escort the princess to Persia. This commission would provide them with the perfect opportunity to begin their journey home while performing one final, crucial service for their patron. The preparation for this voyage was extensive. A fleet of Chinese junks was assembled, provisioned for a journey that might last 2 years or more. The ships were equipped with the latest navigational instruments, including magnetic compasses and detailed charts of the southern sea routes. Provisions included not only food and fresh water, but also gifts and trading goods that would smooth their passage through the various kingdoms they would encounter. The leave-taking from Kublai Khan was emotional for all involved. The aging emperor had grown genuinely fond of his Venetian servants, viewing them almost as family members. Marco, in particular, had become like a son to the Khan, whose own sons had proved disappointing as administrators and advisors. As the three Polos knelt before the Khan for the final time, receiving his blessing and final gifts, there was a sense that an era was ending. The voyage began auspiciously, with favorable winds carrying the fleet southward along the Chinese coast and into the warm waters of Southeast Asia. Princess Kokachin adapted well to life aboard ship, and the Polos found themselves serving not just as navigators and diplomats, but as guardians and companions to the young woman who would become a queen in distant Persia. The journey through the island kingdoms of Southeast Asia became a final tour of the wonders Marco had discovered during his years of service. They stopped at ports in Java and Sumatra, where local rulers honored the princess with elaborate ceremonies and costly gifts. These visits provided opportunities to replenish supplies and gather information about conditions along their intended route. The passage across the Indian Ocean was the most challenging phase of their journey. The monsoon winds that could speed their passage also brought the risk of violent storms, while pirates and hostile kingdoms presented constant dangers. The Chinese captains proved skillful navigators, reading the subtle signs of weather and current that allowed them to avoid the worst hazards while making steady progress toward their destination. After many months at sea, the fleet finally reached the Persian port of Hormuz, where Princess Kokachin was to be delivered to her future husband. However, they discovered that the Khan of Persia had died during their voyage, and she was instead married to his son, who would become her king. The princess, who had grown close to her Venetian guardians during the long sea voyage, bid them farewell with genuine sadness, knowing that they had shared experiences that few people would ever understand. With their official mission completed, the three Polos were free to continue their journey home. They chose to travel overland through Persia and Armenia, retracing portions of the route they had taken nearly 25 years earlier. The world they encountered had changed significantly, new rulers had risen, political boundaries had shifted, and the great age of Mongol expansion was giving way to a more fragmented political landscape. The approach to Constantinople brought a flood of memories and emotions. This was the gateway between East and West, the city where their great adventure had truly begun so many years ago. Now, as they passed through its familiar streets, they were no longer wide-eyed merchants venturing into the unknown, but seasoned travelers carrying within themselves the memories of the greatest empire the world had ever known. The final leg of their journey, from Constantinople to Venice, seemed both endless and too brief. After decades in the vast expanses of Asia, the familiar landscapes of the Mediterranean felt almost cramped, yet every mile brought them closer to home. When they finally sailed into the Venetian lagoon in 1295, after 24 years of absence, they beheld a city that had continued to grow and prosper during their long sojourn in the East. Venice greeted them with a mixture of celebration and skepticism. Their tales of vast cities, paper money, and coal that burned like wood seemed fantastical to people who had never traveled beyond the Mediterranean. Some dismissed their stories as elaborate fabrications, while others were fascinated by their accounts of Eastern wonders and their obvious wealth, accumulated through years of successful trading in Asian markets. The three travelers had returned as different men from those who had departed in 1271. Niccolo and Maffeo were now elderly, satisfied to settle into comfortable retirement with the wealth they had accumulated. But Marco, now in his 40s, carried within himself not just material riches but a treasury of experiences and knowledge that would prove far more valuable than gold or precious stones. As Marco settled back into Venetian life, he found himself changed by his years in the East in ways both obvious and subtle. He had learned to see the world from multiple perspectives, to appreciate the achievements of civilizations very different from his own, and to understand that the boundaries of human possibility were far wider than most Europeans imagined. The young man who had set out seeking adventure had returned as one of the most knowledgeable individuals of his age. The memories of those Eastern years remained vivid and precious. On quiet evenings in his Venetian palace, Marco would remember the sound of camel bells crossing desert sands, the sight of the Khan's golden pavilions reflecting the morning sun, the taste of exotic fruits in tropical gardens, and the wisdom of scholars and poets from dozens of different cultures. These memories would sustain him through the remaining years of his life, constant reminders of the wonders that lay beyond the familiar horizons of home. As we conclude our journey with Marco Polo, we leave him in Venice, surrounded by the comforting familiarity of his birthplace but forever changed by his encounters with the vastness and diversity of the world beyond. His story reminds us that the greatest treasures we can acquire are not material possessions, but the expansion of our understanding, the deepening of our appreciation for human achievement in all its forms, and the knowledge that our world is far more wonderful and mysterious than we can ever fully comprehend. Let Marco's dreams of distant lands and exotic adventures carry you gently into your own rest, knowing that somewhere beyond the edges of our everyday experience lie wonders waiting to be discovered, mysteries waiting to be explored, and stories waiting to be lived. Sleep well, and may your dreams be filled with the same sense of wonder that guided a young Venetian merchant across the world and back again, 7 centuries ago.